Okay. Well, there's one. And I'm sure the other will make himself known soon enough. Hi. You gonna close the lid to my camera? All right. Well, we still had a cat all the same. All right. Now we moved over to Fishing Village. That's the current track that's playing, courtesy of Tabletop Audio. I do support the creator on Patreon as well. I feel it's only fair, as he makes some fantastic music that I use in the background for the workshops and during the live play games as well. So I would heavily suggest giving Tabletop Audio a look. Now, for this next part, as we had discussed culture and what goes into it, economics is a part of that. Economics is born from and yet returns to culture. And it's kind of it's not exactly a yin yang, but they are a part of each other and they complement and oppose each other pretty well. If we didn't talk about, pardon, sorry, I ate a piece of cheese and I've been sipping on some water here. So, but if I didn't talk about the culture and how it's developed and what are some cultural tenets of this place, it would be difficult to describe the economy. I mean, we could go, oh, okay, well, certainly they trade fish. Perhaps they do, maybe. But if so, how valuable is a fish? And how do we determine the value of a fish? It gets back into something, into a concept that's come up a few times in our workshops when we talk about economics. It's how many pine cones do you need to buy a squirrel? So how many pine cones to the squirrel is, what is the going rate in our area for that? And you might say that's a little odd. What, pine cones for a squirrel? I'll get to it. But what I want to do is at first touch on in the player's handbook economic considerations that you can go on a baseline, some baseline measurement through the PHB. The marketplace of a large city teems with buyers and sellers of many sorts. Dwarf smiths and elf wood carvers, halfling farmers and gnome jewelers, not to mention humans of every shape, size, and color, drawn from a spectrum of nations and cultures. In the largest cities, almost anything imaginable is offered for sale, from exotic spices and luxurious clothing to wicker baskets and practical swords. For an adventurer, the availability of armor, weapons, backpacks, rope, and similar goods is of paramount importance, since proper equipment can mean the difference between life and death in a dungeon or the untamed wild. This chapter deals with the mundane and exotic merchandise that adventurers commonly find useful in the face of the threats that the worlds of D&D present. It'll go over starting wealth and starting equipment that you can use to begin. Wealth appears in many forms in a D&D world. Coins, gemstones, trade goods, objets d'art, animals, and property can reflect your character's financial well-being. Members of the peasantry trade in goods, bartering for what they need and paying taxes in grain and cheese. Members of the nobility trade either in legal rights, such as the rights to a mine, a port, or farmland, or in gold bars, measuring gold by the pound rather than by the coin. Only merchants, adventurers, and those offering professional services for hire commonly deal in coins. Common coins come in several different denominations based on the relative worth of the metal from which they are made. The three most common coins are the gold piece, the silver piece, and the copper piece. With one gold piece, a character can buy a bedroll, 50 feet of good rope, or a goat. A skilled but not exceptional artisan can earn one gold piece a day. The gold piece is the standard unit of measure for wealth, even if the coin itself is not commonly used. When merchants discuss deals that involve goods or services worth hundreds or thousands of gold pieces, the transactions usually don't involve the exchange of individual coins. Rather, the gold piece is a standard measure of value, and the actual exchange is in gold bars, letters of credit, or valuable goods. One gold piece is worth 10 silver pieces, the most prevalent coin among commoners. A silver piece buys a laborer's work for half a day, a flask of lamp oil, or a night's rest in a poor inn. One silver piece is worth 10 copper pieces, which are common among laborers and beggars. A single copper piece buys a candle, a torch, or a piece of chalk. In addition, unusual coins made of other precious metals sometimes appear in treasure hoards. The electrum piece and the platinum piece originate from fallen empires and lost kingdoms, and they sometimes arouse suspicion and skepticism when used in transactions. An, an electrum piece is worth 5 silver pieces, and a platinum piece is worth 10 gold pieces. A standard coin weighs about a third of an ounce, so 50 coins weigh a pound. Now, these are guidelines. Ultimately, there's issues of scarcity or utility are going to push and pull on the value of a coin. This is something that we've gone over in our workshop, and if you know it, you can shout it out. But for someone newer who might not have heard this before, Medusa Queen, are you still here with us? We might not have Medusa here. Is there anyone newer that might not have heard this discussion before? Any of you out there lurking in chat, if you found your way in here? Lemony, I don't know if you've been around for conversations like this, or if you have a moment. Is there anyone newer that is lurking? All right, let me bring it over to Stella then. Stella, as you said, gold has been the base. The question, well, I hadn't prompted it yet. Why has gold been a base around the world as a unit of value of coinage, of currency, as money, something that we hold dear? Why is gold the gold standard? It is a pretty shiny rock. That is true too. That does play into it in part. Yeah, oh, yep, that plays into it. It is fairly rare. That is true. So gold in our world, well, in many parts of our world, gold is fairly rare. Now, there's some other parts where gold might not be worth as much because it is more common. Although now there's a more global market. Anyway, that gets into a whole other thing. But scarcity plays into gold. However, there's more there's more to it than just that. If you want something to hold value, you don't want it to what, Jedi? What don't you want your value holding resource to do? Rot. Well, or become abundant. Yeah, there we go, Stella. Gold is a metal that doesn't rust. Um, yep. Now there is something that can tarnish gold, but gold does not oxidize. Now silver does and copper does, though gold does not normally tarnish. And so just by existing, it will not degrade and lose its value. If you find gold, it's there unless you do something very specific to it. And it's not like you're going to find a rock like a geode. You crack it open and it's full of mercury. Okay. So you have something that has a relatively low melting point, so it's easy to melt, mold, beat into bars, coins, or shape into luxurious things. And unless you really go out of your way to destroy it, it's not going to be destroyed on its own. It doesn't oxidize. And because of its weight, there is some measure of security because stealing 100 gold bars, it's not necessarily a one-person job. Well, I mean, if we take bags of holding out of the equation anyway. So it is a very good blend of things. Now, I would argue that there is, if we think back to Renaissance times or before, if you want to put your D&D world in a medieval setting, there is another metal that is very rare, also doesn't tarnish, and is meltable and malleable. Do you all have a guess as to what that metal is? A real metal, though, Bagger. Let's see. Stella says silver plating will tarnish, but only because of the other metals that it is capping. Plus, that silver is good for your health, though its natural ability to fight disease and bacteria. In folklore and myth, that's also why silver is seen as a pure element that can kill werewolves and repel vampires and things like that too. Let me tell you of a metal that was exceedingly rare and would have been worth maybe more than its weight in gold. Aluminum. Aluminum. Now, in today's modern world, you might say, "What? Aluminum is cheap as free." I can go to Kroger. Well, I can't go to Kroger right now. It's after close. I go to Kroger right now and get 3 12 packs of hashtag not sponsored soda for $12. In fact, I can even recycle it and get some money back on it. Planes are made out of aluminum. It's way more abundant than gold is. And yes, now it is. Aluminum aluminum is it is its own element. It has a natural existence. Yeah, aluminum used to be more expensive than gold because of the process to extract it. To process it. It's sort of like titanium is actually a crystal. You got to process it, and then it's a metal. But that's why the LOC has aluminum. What is LOC, Tio? You lost me on the acronym. But aluminum, if that were to be more commonly able to be processed. Oh, okay. Yep. At the time, the Washington, the obelisk, the Washington Memorial, or the Washington Monument, had a cap of aluminum as a show of the wealth and ingenuity of the United States. Monday Night Fantasy, hello. One Shot happens on Monday. I'm going to try Rune Knight for an evening. Ooh, I hope you enjoy it. That is a, anecdotally, it is a underplayed, well, wait, by Rune Knight, you mean like the Mystic Knight or whatever, the mage, the third caster fighter, Monday Night Fantasy. But anyway, aluminum doesn't tarnish normally. It is malleable, ductile. It can have a lower melting point as well. Very portable. And so in your fantasy world, if those people ever discovered effectively a mine of aluminum, or at least had the way to process aluminum, then that might actually be a staple better than gold. Okay, yeah, it's the one from Tasha's. I'm thinking of Eldritch Knight from the Player's Handbook. Moose! Aluminum does oxidize. It does tarnish. It has to react with something that, like, aluminum itself doesn't just rust. It doesn't sit around and rust. Is that also what has to react with mercury? I'm trying to remember my chemistry. Does mercury eats gold and aluminum alike, doesn't it? Or am I thinking about something else with gold? Oh, this is going to bug me. If you all know, please let me know. You have a short story / get rich quick scheme that involves aluminum and time travel. There was kind of a Seinfeld episode about that to you. Kind of a Seinfeld episode about that. But that would be another great store of wealth. Okay, mercury does eat aluminum. All right. Gallium and aluminum do funky things, says Survival. Aluminum will react and destroy itself when in contact with iron or other metal. Okay, so similar to what you were saying, Stella, that the oxidization is if it is in contact with some other things. Then, but anyway, that's why we had used that metal as a standard. It's difficult to destroy the wealth once it's been harvested, and you can store it in many different ways. The ultimate value of it is going to depend on its scarcity and or its ease to process. If you are in a land where gold is abundant, it might not have as much value because it is a commonly found thing. And especially if gold doesn't do anything else, if it doesn't have another use really besides just being a shiny metal, you might go, it's cool. You know, I've seen a lot of shiny, gray metals, but not a yellowy metal. But, bismuth is cool, but it's not really, bismuth might not exactly be as hip as other metals are to work with, and for other reasons too. But if there's a lot of gold and it doesn't have a lot of function outside of existing, it's not going to be worth as much in the economy. If it's scarcer, and especially if it not just as it has the properties of retention, but if there's uses for it. Stella was talking about earlier about gold straying in price from silver. And, in a fantasy setting, we have magic. And so maybe gold is a conductor of magic or something. Well, in our real world, gold is used in conductors. And so it has a practical use as well. Although, interestingly, there can be a very large discrepancy in the cost of diamonds between industrial use grinding diamonds and the diamond that you would get on a ring or in jewelry. Same substance, different prices for different uses. So that's something for you to think about. Coinage is very easy for us to start with an economy because many of us are used to it. We understand the concept of coins, and to an extent, even if the intricacies of a fiat currency aren't known to you, we understand a fiat currency and how that works as well. Not just a direct, I'm handing you a gold piece because the gold piece has value, when instead we just have to pretend that this piece of dyed cotton actually has value when it doesn't really have value. I mean, nothing more than arguably what it took to harvest the cotton and the ink to whatever, right? This is made up value that we all just pretend is worth something, whereas the actual thing is made of something that has use and a whole other set of circumstances, and it has intrinsic value to it. Pardon. Yeah, Jedi. And there's a very good episode of Deep Space Nine where Quark has been duped. Quark, it'll be redundant to say mercantile Ferengi, but if you're not familiar with Ferengi, I should qualify that. Quark is a mercantile character, a Ferengi in specifics. And there's an episode where he is surrounded by Useless gold. It's just gold. It might as well be garbage, because gold in that time, in that universe, doesn't have value because it could just be replicated. There is no scarcity. You can take the mass of things and turn it into something else. It takes energy, but energy has been unlocked and has been abundant and not scarce at all either. Star Trek is an example of a post-scarcity economy, though there are people like the Ferengi who still operate off of scarcity, which is why they trade in latinum. Latinum is a metal that cannot be replicated for whatever reason, and you hear gold pressed latinum because gold is the container that holds the latinum inside of it. So you should ask yourself, in this world, where do you want to start? Where do you want to start things? Do you want to start it with a mineral? Do you want to start it with how many pine cones do you need to buy a squirrel? Because ultimately, bartering, even this stuff is bartering. I am going to trade you a moment of my life that I spent doing something, and in exchange, you're going to give me something in return. A product, a service, or a feeling. You need $1, here you go. I feel good for it. We still traded. A trade was still made. And so this is one kind of bartering. But it is what it is. Hi, Ryufu. And if you want to get exotic about things as well, oh, check that out. You don't see too many of those. And yet, despite their scarcity, this is still only worth 2 of these, even though there is far and away more of these in existence than these. Yeah, shut up and take my pine cones. Which, by the way, if you all have older bills, check and make sure they're not actually silver certificates. Yes, because they look fancier, and you get more attention from the staff. Jedi says, I had a coworker cashier that asked me if a $2 bill was real. Stella says, I have a $2 silver note. Yeah, so you want to check if you have silver notes. Those are different than pretend makeup. This actually is worth nothing. At least if the full faith and credit of the U.S. is to be believed. That is a case-by-case basis and a discussion for another time. Yeah, the print is red on them. Yep. It's worth looking into. If you all have older bills, you might want to check and see if it's actually a silver note. And if you have older coins, too, that are actually made of the metal, like nickels being made of nickel, weird. And that's for collectability, scarcity. I can go on and on. Anyway, in this case, what if there are absolutely no coniferous trees in this region? What if they're all deciduous? In that case, a pine cone is worth a lot. In fact, instead of a potato might actually be abundant around here, Ryufu. But a pine cone might be able to buy you a sword. Yep, pre-65 quarters are silver. There you go. So check the date of your quarters too. I have a fondness for the 75 drummer boy quarters. I don't have a huge collection of them, but you know, the kind of uncommon coins like the drummer boy quarters and the wheat pennies. Those are fun if you find them. Where was I? Oh, right. So let's take a look because we now have our map. What is it we can base an economy around? Obviously, bartering, which means that we should have a measure of how many pine cones it takes to buy a squirrel. And if pine cones nor squirrels exist, then what is an equivalent? But you get the idea. Well, as we were making it, we did say that the glacier, as it's been scraping along all this time, and is just instantly melted by this field or shield put up by the crystal. There is a lot of mineral wealth that gets scraped along and harvested, and this glacier has been a centuries old conveyor belt for metals and rocks. And rocks are precious too as a building material. So we were talking about these rivers probably are panned for gold and other minerals and gems all the way down. Because as the water is we go from ice instantly to water and it collects. Then the water flows out to the sea, and there's a good chance that there's a lot of maybe what other people might consider wealth, and that's probably what has drawn a lot of people here to harvest the easy gold and other things that have been scraped up from the hundreds of miles, if not more, of Earth that the glacier has passed along on its way. Now, to the people who live here, gold might actually not mean all that much. In fact, you might find that iron, if iron isn't picked up because maybe it's rusted or destroyed, or this part of the world just doesn't have a lot of iron for one reason or another, you might have a situation similar to Dragonlance. Steel pieces in Dragonlance are the de facto coinage because a steel piece like a coin can always be turned into a sword or armor or a utensil or something. Steel is valuable because of its purposes. Gold is not as valued because it can't do as much, and the economy, the people, the culture in Dragonlance need materials that are useful more than they need gold. Oh, like Beskar? Yeah, Beskar is very rare because it can actually block a lightsaber, let alone other forms of energy. The American Steel Company was just sold to Japan. And you want to talk about conflict, the need for modern resources like fuel, like gasoline. I mean, for a long while, like raw oil before the automobile industry and other things came around, it was almost a nuisance. What are you going to do with it? This land is infected with this stuff. It's gross. It kills plants, blah, blah, blah. But now, after a use was found for it, well, there we go. In countries that wanted to modernize but didn't have a bunch of dead plants and dinosaurs to harvest, were in need of it. And that is a contributing factor to how Japan entered World War II. That's not the entirety, and I'm not going to be out here. Obviously, this is not a history lesson in that regard. But the need for steel and oil and things can also exacerbate hostility, if not economics. And many more people would rather trade goods and services than trade bullets. And it's also because iron in its own way was it's not rare, but the grade of it and how it was made, especially into their swords, was different. That's why you can get a katana that the steel kind of flakes on it, even through the folding process. It has to do with the sand and the iron sand. Anyway, whole other issue. But it can go into the economy of things. Wood for sheep. Or this is Catan. Oh, you know what? Instead of a circle, the crystal should actually form a hex. The crystal should form the sacred six-sided geometry around it, and we actually have just a big hex field around around this place. I know, Stella. I'm just playing into some quick and easy memes here. It's so now that we have the information, we can determine what's valuable. If we need food and everyone needs food and it's consumed, that is also a very good baseline for the economy in your world, in your area. If it's an abundant food source, it will become a part of the culture. It'll be economically important, but it may not be a great source of wealth unless there's a force that seeks to monopolize it. Aha! We have an autocracy as the form of government, and the initial discussion for the autocracy was that the ruling family is the one who is controlling or pretending to control the crystal that is giving everyone their life, their abundance. Even though there's some interesting drawbacks to it, especially if it suppresses heat from fire or cold from magic and other things. This means that we really don't have refrigeration. We don't really have meaningful sources of great heat. That could mean that metals would be very difficult to smelt. Raw ore would have to be, raw ore would have to be shipped out, or any of the processing would have to take place outside the shield where it is dangerously cold and subject to homeostasis effects. I was about to say homeopathic, but I mean, and herbs and spices and everything, that could work too. So there's a danger, and the resources are a lot more limited because once you burn up all these trees, there's not a lot of trees that are going to be growing back here. And there could be trees that are growing here, but that is competing for the very scarce amount of land that is kept in this perpetual state. So actual sources of heat enough to melt down ore could be very rare and valuable. So fire and cold, in their own ways, as energy or as something that can go into a product or service, would be of high value because it's high risk and it's scarce. This would also mean that the water in the bay is about the same temperature as the air in the dome at all times. which could be refreshing, but you'd never really get a cold shower on a hot summer day because it's never really that hot. And you would never really get warm water on you would never really get warm water on if it was ever chilly for the same reason. Everything is kept about the same after a certain distance or time or whatever, because there is this homeostatic effect in place that will go on to affect food. If things the minerals are probably literally pouring into this place, if they're difficult to process, the architecture and carpentry might rely more on glue made from the hooves and horns of the goats, or joints, various joints where the wood sets in itself. And as well, if you don't have to worry about heavy snow on a roof, the architecture is going to be different because you don't need to bear the weight of the snow nor shed it as easily. The crystal is in place, Jedi. Yeah, so you can look at oil as a battery of solar energy, Stella. Salt would also be critical if refrigeration cannot be achieved. Yep. So the refrigeration would most likely be either having freezers just beyond the border, or because you couldn't even sink it. It's not like you take if you're up in Michigan, you get a bunch of apples, you throw them in a barrel, and you sink it into a lake, and the refrigeration of the lake is there. The water is the same temperature. So salt would be important. There's probably a big part of the cuisine is salted fish, salted pork from the boar, salted goat, salted cheese, and things like that. Yeah, you're very welcome, Stella. I like having these engaging conversations. So salt is valuable. Now they can create it if they, by taking it from the water here. So maybe it's not scarce, but it is definitely needed. And I mean, you can see that. Well, this is going to snowball, even if that snowball will near instantaneously melt upon hitting the field around this place. If you start with how many pine cones does it take to buy a squirrel, and then ask yourself, are there even pine cones in squirrels? And if it takes 2 squirrels to a pine cone, that would tend to show you that pine cones are a lot more valued for one reason or another than squirrels. And if instead you say, well, there's not squirrels, but you know what? From everything that scrapes down the mountain out to the sea and melts here. Yep, Roman soldiers paid in salt and beer. Yep. There's a lot of conquest and trade because of the raw wealth that is coveted outside of this area. Inside here, gold might easily be traded like anything else, or hoarded, or whatever, if it's not consumed in something by a magic ritual, or just, I don't know, sunk to the sea or something. Although, you know what, Jenny? This would be an interesting consideration now that you talked about it and Stella brought it up too. If this is a homeostatic crystal that was meant to give the ideal conditions for humanoid life, what if it removed the salt? Well, I know we're dealing with magic and it's like, where's the limitations? Because ultimately we as creatures need salt in us in other things need salt to conduct the electricity in our bodies. Um, Although if the salt was removed and this was actually almost like a freshwater lake, that would mean that the salt would build up on the outside, and or this would be super salty, meaning that this would also be very dangerous work to go harvest the salt as well. Well, however you'd want to have it, consider that. Remember, scarcity and utility are big drivers in any economic exchange, and this is why the halflings came in. If you want to say, halflings, they're traditionally farmers and they love agriculture. Well, the halflings of this world conquered this area from the long-lived the half elves, but if we don't consider it like half elf, half human or orc or tiefling or whatever, maybe they conquered it from those people because it was an agrarian takeover. The people who lived here, it might very well be a Cain and Abel style allegory of the takers conquered the leavers. The people who domesticated animals and made tools, their culture won over hunter-gatherers who just lived off the land. It could be a story or an example in that way, where we have the half-elves, which might be more of like a Tolkien Numenorian human, a very long-lived, approaching elf human. And so they came in with their tools and they domesticated the place. But they themselves might not have been ready or grew up in this area, and it's causing conflict. It's causing turmoil. With them came plague. There's a plague that has broken out. With them came the fact that this place has become destitute, probably because so many people have been pouring in. It either can't keep up, or there's just not enough maintenance because too many people want to extract what is very literally pouring into the place to take it out where gold means something. Gold is valuable outside the bubble. Yeah. Oh, in fact, Moose, there's a salt mine under Lake Erie and the other Great Lakes, but in Cleveland, you can go to the city of Cleveland. There's a salt mine that's a couple thousand feet below the lake because it's all salt because it used to be an inland sea, right? Salt deposits. Oh yeah, under Detroit as well came up right to the surface, and a mine was established. Yep. In fact, that played a big part in last year's The Red Deemer Vampire the Masquerade game, which, hey, go check it out on YouTube if that sort of concept fascinates you. Then watch that 3-part series. It was a lot of fun. All right, have a good night, Belladonna. Salt Flat, Salt Glacier. Some soldiers were paid in garlic for a while. Lake Michigan as well. Local government could require outsider to bring items of worth from outside. Yeah, and in that case, if tools, Bagger, if we say that tools are difficult to make because of the extreme heat and cold suppressing effects, then that might be what you need. Like, that is an import. This area must import crafted metals because they cannot easily be, even through magical means, be created inside of it. And so a hammer that's a dozen for a dime, right? 12 for 10 cents. A hammer, which is so common and ubiquitous in other areas, suddenly has the value spike in this area, especially because there's growth, and especially because the material, at least the hammerheads, are going to be rarer. And we know that if they're using the hammers to dig into the glacier to break up things, to chip and mine and do lapidary work, and to build more and more of this developing city, then it's gold nuggets out, iron or steel hammers in. And so we have a very interesting exchange rate going on where we can measure the value. So wood and iron coming into this place is very valuable. Gold and gems, not as much. And so as trade normalizes from the people who were here and now the conquerors to outside where the conquerors came from, or to other societies, this place might actually be an international trading port and hub. It could be its own kind of city state as well. People will bring in common steel and wood hammers and walk out with gold and jewels. Whereas back in their home country, you could buy 10 hammers for a gold piece because of how ubiquitous those materials are. Not only make tools valuable, but weapons as well. Yes. Non-leather weapon or armor, or like non-wood, non-bone, non-leather armor and weapons. But yeah, metal like that would have a high value because it either has to be made outside in the dangerous cold, and the wilds of whatever creatures that have adapted to live here, and not in here, but they're willing to stay close because they know that there's easy pickings just on this side of the dome, or whatever, the dimmadome we talked about. And so it's extremely dangerous, but you can do it out here. The modern day form of wealth is form. The materials in a certain form are what create wealth, not the minerals themselves. The form they take, such as a RAM chip you put into your computer. Yep. Otherwise, the silicone and other things that go into it. I mean, silicone is, you can buy that in many other shapes and forms. You can buy the same amount of silicone made into a fidget popper that would cost you 10 times as much as if it were made into a statue of like a little statuette of something, or processed into a if the silicone, or the silicate anyway, was processed into a microchip or glass or something, right? The silicate and sand. Well, so through this exercise, did we talk about what the hard and fast economics are? No, and you can always impose that. You can give your players a sheet that has general conversion rates, especially if they're traveling here. They're level 11. So if they're traveling here from some other place that maybe use the standard D&D book, you can say, all right, based on the standard rates you've gotten to know from levels 1 through 10, this is what you're looking at as an exchange rate in this area. They can keep it as a cheat sheet, and they can grow into this new normal. And that might even get them thinking, oh, if only we could establish a trade route, or to take a caravan back to our homelands from here, and we could have it filled with gems and other things. So I still hope that this was a good conversation. It gave you something to think about, and as silly as it sounds, use how many pine cones to a squirrel as your fundamental economic basis. In a case like this, I definitely see bartering, if not of goods, then of time, to be worthwhile. And now here's the other interesting consideration I'll throw in at the last minute. Is the labor of the half elves, the long-lived humanoids, the Numenorians, is that worth less than that of the halflings who don't live as long? Either because of the scarcity of their natural length of life, or because of the difference in skill sets, intelligence, or other cultural adaptations. If someone lives 2, 3, 4 times as long as someone else, how would that affect their economy? Because they have longer to invest their time or invest their money. They have more time in their lives than the shorter lived people. Maybe for simplicity's sake, you go, nope, someone, a day's work is a day's work, and I'm going to call it at that for one reason or another. Cool. That's absolutely fine. If you want to go deeper than that, especially if there is strife, if the autocracy is a feared tyrant and that there is a clash between the conquering halflings and the half elves, then there might actually be deeper socioeconomic issues, such as the value of a person's life. And fantasy games like this are wonderful for exploring those concepts. And if you do want to explore it, a setup like this is a great way of doing so. And I hope that you can, and it leads you to discoveries of an educational nature, of a philosophical, or even a moral nature. As you go about asking those hypothetical questions and answering them in the experiment of your story. Yep, Bagger. There's probably a lot of shipwrecks that have the golden gems, but in the winter storms that they weren't, insulated against, that have sunk. There's probably a lot of wealth in sunken ships, even close by out here. It's set by the local class structure, yeah. Class and maybe even caste as well, CASTE. Stella says people today revere wealth differently than did in the past. We look at minerals in a certain form of conductibility and electric transfer compared to spirituality and love of those that have passed. Yeah. It's going into more of a utilitarian look of things, right, Stella? But there we go. See, that wasn't so bad for an economics lesson. It's like maybe I've taught economics before. I hope that this was very digestible, that this was understandable, even as a baseline. Like, we didn't get into supply and demand graphs as those slide around. We didn't talk about elasticity. We didn't talk about externalities and all these other things. So it just like the waters, they can get deeper. However, if you have a starting point to your journey, you can enjoy the rest of it wherever it takes you. And you yourself can organically build and take the next step in a direction that feels right for you. I don't want to tell you what to think. I don't want to give you a hard and fast exchange rate. I just want you to think, to be given the tools that you can use to design your world. That you can be given the question, not just the answer, because it means more if you ask the question, even if you don't know what the question is at first. You have to ask the question, then receive the answer, rather than just be told an answer, because it's not the same. It doesn't have the same weight. It doesn't have the same meaning. How many times has someone told you something that makes absolute sense and you have resented it because you feel like you're being bossed around, or you feel like you're being talked down to, or that who's this person telling me advice that is 100% accurate and maybe something you should have done. But the way it was conveyed wasn't proper. However, if you ask the question, I would rather seed the question than necessarily give you an answer to something you never asked. I'd rather you ask. Always ask those questions. Always seek that next step. And if you do, I swear to you, worlds of imagination and possibility are going to open up before you, let alone opportunity in our real world. And you become that amazing, beautiful, gorgeous liminal gate between the two. You become the utilitarian conduit from reality to fantasy and escapism. You have a proven use, which, as was explored in the comment above, might mean a whole lot more in today's world than simply saying I exist, which you do. But there are many who might also say, so what? Everyone exists. That alone does not make you special. Now, does that mean that you should be treated like garbage? Absolutely not. I'm not. That statement's not stripped of humanity. But what I offer is a way to reinforce, embrace your intrinsic humanity and individuality by this outward generation of wonder, knowledge, questions that get other people involved in learning, by creating things, especially in a world of destruction right now. You brace and buttress yourself, and you prove that you are a scarce and valuable thing. Because until you are, you aren't. In a very cold, unfeeling sense. And if you have a feeling that the world is cold and uncaring, I hope this talk has kindled that warmth in you then. World building can lead to... Bagger, I wish I could hand out like associate's degrees in a multitude of disciplines. For as much as we talk about them and as long as we've been doing it, y'all have been sitting in for 2 years worth of classes for sure. Oh gosh.